Welcome to the Sisterhood in Politics podcast, a podcast that features women engaged in transformative politics from different parts of the world. And the Sisterhood in Politics podcast is a flagship podcast of the Consortium for Intersectional Justice. My name is Chamindra Weerawardhana, and I'm the director of the Consortium for Intersectional Justice and your host for today. So today we have a very special guest joining us from the Indigenous territories, the unceded sovereign territories known as Australia, from NARM, from Melbourne. And our guest is Madame Anasina Gray-Barberio, who is an MLC, that is a member of the Legislative Council, which is the upper house of the Parliament of Victoria. And Madame Anasina is the member of the Legislative Council for the Northern Metropolitan Region. That's her constituency. And Anasina, it's a great pleasure. Talofa, it's a great pleasure to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Talofa lava, back to you as well. It's such a pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
Mm-hmm. It's a pleasure indeed. So, Madam Anasina, as it is customary among many Pacific communities, shall we start with what the Maori people called Fakapapa, or can you tell us about, your background, your roots, your early inspirations, where you come from, and how you kind of come into this?
Yeah, I'd love to. So my ancestry is Samoan. I come from a little small island in the Pacific, about like a 5-hour flight from Sydney.
Mhm.
And my family migrated to Melbourne back in the late 90s. So by the time I had arrived to Melbourne, I was a teenager. I was born in the islands, did a bit of my schooling in the islands, also spent a bit of time in Aotearoa in New Zealand before our family settled here in Melbourne. Being a Pacific Island women, it's really special because the things that are really important to us are things like family, are things like taking care of your community. And that includes people that are not Islander as well, that share your same ancestry. Things like taking care of your neighbor and getting to know your neighbor on a deep level, is something that I feel like has eroded quite a bit in our society, where a lot of people live in their streets but don't really know who their neighbors are. So that was something that was imparted on me pretty young as well. And, some of the values that Pacific Island people really, really care and nurture growing up is reciprocity, is ensuring that you're able to give back to people without the expectation of anything in return. And I think that's something that I've carried as a teenager all the way up to where I am right now, being a public servant here in Melbourne and Naarm.
Right. Bless. Very good. That's good to hear. And so you spent some time in Aotearoa, the family, before moving on to NARM. So before politics now, before entering active electoral politics, you founded an organization, Engage Pacifica. So Engage Pacifica focuses on closing gaps in culturally responsive healthcare. So what's one lesson from that grassroots work, that Spring Street still hasn't learned? Or what are your thoughts on, how you kind of continue that Engage Pacifica work? Or maybe we can just start with what for our listeners and viewers joining from different parts of the world, what does Engage Pacifica entail? Like, what was Engage Pacifica
Yeah,
all about?
absolutely. So the whole premise and why Engage Pacifica came to be was born out of COVID, the pandemic,
Uh-huh.
where Pacific Islanders were presenting to hospitals with very intensive symptoms of COVID. And
Mm-hmm.
the hospitals in the north where I grew up, they didn't know what was happening with our communities and why they were presenting with these intensive symptoms of COVID. And I guess for me, I realized, my goodness, there's such a gap here with providing
Mm-hmm.
healthcare to culturally diverse communities, such as the Pacific Island community. There's a really big community in the north. And I realized, well, we need to have our voices in healthcare. The inequities,
Yes.
the disparities in accessing healthcare, knowing your rights as a patient was so important, and there was a huge gap in that. And so that's why Engage Pacifica came about. It was an opportunity to really advocate for our communities, to have their experiences represented across healthcare networks. And it really was great. In terms of like, what could Spring Street or the Parliament in Victoria learn about, the experiences of different communities with healthcare, is meaningful engagement. Like often
Mhm.
you have governments coming into communities doing their tick and flick, superficial, tokenistic, performative engagement. And then that's it. The community doesn't hear any follow through. They don't know where their survey responses have gone to. Communities are over consulted, fatigued with always being asked, what's your opinion? What's your perspective? And then nothing really real and tangible is happening on the ground to make their lives better. So
Mhm.
I really think Spring Street has, a lot to learn from communities around what it means to be inclusive, but also what it means to belong to your community as well.
Absolutely. And also, I myself am a Lancet commissioner, and I'm well aware of the systemic challenges that Indigenous
Mm,
women, especially, and gender diverse people as well, face when accessing healthcare. And so, you hit the nail there, meaningful engagement, because there is some engagement in the form of these surveys and everything. But how can we facilitate meaningful engagement? So I think this precedent you have set with Engage Pacifica has lot of transferable implications to other contexts as well within Australia and beyond. So it is an initiative I think we must keep front and center. When we talk of your political work, I think it's the meaningful engagement. That whole point about meaningful engagement is extremely important. So
mm.
Anasina, can you tell us about your journey into electoral politics? What were your considerations when choosing a political party and in kind of positioning yourself in the political establishment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was politically engaged from a young age, but didn't
Mhm.
really know that you could actually be a member of a political party. And unless you're exposed to people that are politically active and activated, you don't know what is possible with regards
Yes,
to
that's true.
politics and how politics can be a vehicle for change structurally and systemically. And so my journey really started in community, to be honest. Like it started watching and observing my parents when we first arrived here in Melbourne, watching them advocate, watching them work within systems and paradigms that were so colonial in the way that it engaged and treated, people of the system. And then it was also watching my mum, especially. My mum is my hero, and watching her like just not settle, like that kind of like you know justice kind of lens, not just for us as their children, but for the whole community as well, and trying always as best as she could with her knowledge change the systems at the roots, because at the core of politics is systems change. We have to change the system, otherwise it just perpetuates the same kind of cycles. And so in terms of like how did I choose which political party suited me? Very much a values based person. So I chose the Greens party here in Victoria. I felt like their values around people over profit, their values on climate justice and environmental justice was really important. I mean, as a Pacific Islander, I come from a region in the Pacific that is susceptible to rising tides, and that we do
Mhm.
have neighboring islands that will be underwater. And it's not like this thing that's happening in a few years' time, it's actually happening right now.
Mhm.
So, I have a responsibility to use my platform and my voice to really push for climate justice and what that
Mhm.
looks like for people from the Pacific.
Mhm. Very much so, very much so. So that kind of explains how you started working with the Green Party,
Yeah,
and also the Green Party's policies in Australia kind of align with those priorities, with the priorities, especially when
absolutely.
you think of ecosystems
Yes.
and the lived environment in the Pacific region. So, Anasina, at this point, I'd like to go into one occasion that is, I would say, quite disturbing to read about, let alone experience it. The time when your people were not allowed to celebrate your maiden speech in Parliament on the grounds that, and I quote, on fear of setting any precedents with regards to engagement of the gallery and the chamber. So, this is what they gave as an explanation, the Victoria Parliamentary Establishment. So this goes against the standard practice in many neighbouring countries, like in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, in Wellington, New Zealand, at the Parliament of New Zealand, for example, and perhaps in the Australian Parliament as well. So it's customary for people to come and sing their vayatas and sing their songs and celebrate the arrival of their community member as member of Parliament to this parliamentary space. So can you share some thoughts about what happened here, what it and also about what it says, what this whole experience says about these institutions?
Yeah. Gosh, it feels like it just happened yesterday, to be honest. So
Oh.
basically, to give some context, this was for my inaugural speech, like so my first speech in
Hmm.
Parliament. And we had requested of the Victorian Parliament if our youth could sing a song. The song was going to be, it was an important song to who we are as a people, and it
Hmm.
was only going to take 2 to 3 minutes max, just
Right.
singing. It's
Yeah.
not going to be like a big party, but and then we've requested, try to find different avenues that we could make this happen, but we just got shut down the whole way through. And exactly what you just said, we got told that we didn't want to create a precedence of engagement from the gallery with the chamber. And so
Hmm.
basically what happened was they said, yes, we could sing, but it had to be outside the chamber before I walked in. So it wasn't even
Oh.
inside the chamber. So, our people, our young people were all there lined up in the hallway outside the chamber. You couldn't hear us. I mean, sorry, you couldn't see
Hmm.
us. You could definitely hear us. And, it's just this fear of the unknown, fear of different
Hmm.
cultures, fear of, difference as well. But, the feedback that I got from a lot of different members who were not of the Greens party was, oh, that was beautiful. Like, that sounded amazing. And so, it seems like this really, really clear message that while we celebrate your culture really doesn't belong in here in this institution. This institution
Hmm.
is, set in its ways, and it will not flex for anybody or any culture, which is mind
Hmm.
boggling because you have sitting around the chamber a majority white Anglo elected representatives who go out into the
Right.
community and celebrate all the various cultures that make up the melting pot that is Melbourne, but yet won't advocate for the same thing inside, the halls of
Right.
parliament, the halls of power.
Yeah.
It's just so hypocritical. But you know what? Like in that moment, I had, I felt like I had the power of my ancestors running through
Hmm.
me. It gave me strength that, like, we sang, and then they had to wait out there, and I walked into the chamber. Um,
Oh.
so, it was disappointing, but I don't know how to explain this. It was still very, very
Hmm.
powerful for us that even though you're
Hmm.
telling us we belong out there, our voice belongs in here. So, in a
Hmm.
lot of ways,
Yeah.
even though the system tries to shut out different people, it's so important
Mhm.
that we continue to stand in our power.
Absolutely. And also, it's as if the establishment says that you are welcome in that space, but on their terms, on the
Correct.
terms of the colonial
Yes.
establishment, right? So
Yes.
that also shows to me how difficult it has been for them to impose this colonial establishment on the indigenous people there, and how keen they are to, even today, even so many decades later, to still stick to a policy that is kind of reminiscent of that declaration of Terra Nullius, where they are hell bent on maintaining a certain power base,
Yes.
which is eroding. Indigenous people are rising. The younger generations are very conscious of settler younger generation in a majority, as well as young indigenous people. They're very conscious. Young Pacifica people, they're very conscious of their heritage and of their sovereignty. So more power to you to keep walking through these corridors.
Thank
And
you.
a great pleasure. Anasina, at this point, let's talk about policy. So what are your current main dossiers or current main policy priorities as such? So we know that you have a very strong interest in climate justice, and can you zoom in on some of the aspects of your
Yeah.
main policy priorities that are at your desk right now?
Absolutely. Right now in Victoria and Australia as a whole, we're really experiencing, I guess, the global pattern coming over to Australia of the rise of the
Mhm.
far right. And
Right.
with that rise of the far right, on the receiving end of that division, of that hate, of that tension, are multicultural, are First Nations, are gender diverse people. So, sitting in my portfolio is anti racism and multiculturalism. I also carry early childcare and prevention of family violence and women, gender equity, to
Mhm.
offer a few, and also disability. With all these portfolios and many more that I have, there are intersections
Mhm.
for all of
Mhm.
these portfolios, like, compounding barriers for people, for women, for communities to really be able to have an opportunity to thrive and succeed.
Mhm.
And so anyway, so with the rise of the far right, like they're really coming after quite hard the scapegoating of migrants, and in particular
Mhm.
the Muslim community here in Victoria and Nam.
Right.
Um,
Mhm.
and we're seeing this also happen globally in the UK, obviously in America with Trump as well, and how important it is right now to be able to stand in solidarity with our communities, but really call out the government and the major corporate parties, the role that they
Mhm.
have played in being inactive and not getting involved a lot sooner, to be able to stamp out this kind of divisive, hateful rhetoric that is really gaining a
Right.
foothold in our communities. You're seeing it right now. People just feel so emboldened to spread hate publicly. It's very,
Mhm.
very concerning. And it's really important that as political figures, we're not exacerbating this problem, that we are trying to diffuse it, de escalate it, and really spread unity at this moment, but also call out the racism, the discrimination, the sexism, the misogyny that continues to rise, in our societies.
Absolutely. And the rise of these movements, the far right movements, fascist elements. So, in my next book, Feminism in the Age of Fascism, I talk about how fascism has a presence. It has different levels, layers, and it has a presence all around us. It kind of wraps us around. It wraps around us in every political context. So, if unless we are cautious to call it out in its early stages, it keeps rising. So this is what has happened. And also the other side of it is that the conservative political establishments, they have lost ground to the work that the likes of you have done, right, and your ancestors have done, the work that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have done, the work that has been happening in the Maori world, in Te Ao Maori, in Aotearoa. So what they want, and the women's movement, the advancements that they have made in the Western world. So what they want is to reclaim that space that they have lost. So that is why they're coming for starting with the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, the low-hanging fruit as such, the people who are easiest to demonize, and they're coming for all of us. It's very important that we stay conscious of these realities. So it's very good that you mentioned the rise of the far right and how you position your politics strategically, being very conscious of those challenges. And I think that's very advisable to anybody interested in politics, especially women interested in public life who are watching this or listening to this. Anasina, tell us a little bit more about your portfolios on women, gender equality, and family violence. You touched on this earlier, and your work for culturally appropriate family violence support. So how do, I would say, within inverted commas, multicultural women in Victoria? By that, what I mean is women from different backgrounds, different ethnic, racial, cultural, social backgrounds, different citizenships, perhaps, who have a certain immigration status in the context of the Commonwealth of Australia, which also restricts, may or may not restrict their rights or access to public funds or access to services. So how do women from different backgrounds navigate seeking help when the systems meant to protect them haven't been supportive, or when the system doesn't speak the language, or when there's I would say, intercultural miscommunication or misunderstandings and so on? What are your thoughts on those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the challenges for multicultural women are going to be varied. They're going to be nuanced and complex and multi-layered. And right now, like there are services, specialist women's services that are doing a great job. However, a lot of the funding priorities seem to only target the crisis versus the early intervention and prevention work that is much needed. And so, trying to shift the dial of that has been really hard for a lot of women, because there's the understanding of the system, and the system itself is so complex for women from different backgrounds to try and navigate and understand. Like knowing like the legal system, for example, is so difficult and
Yes, yeah.
complex. Trying to understand the police institution, for example, is not always the safest place for
100%.
culturally
Yes, yes,
diverse
yes.
women to go and report an incident or like a case of violence, because the police itself has a history of mistrust in the community, or their racist beliefs around culturally diverse women. Like that still exists. That has not gone away. And these are just some of the ways that that women are experiencing violence. There's also dowry abuse as well. It's not just the partner. The system doesn't always recognize it could be the family-in-law, the sister-in-law, the mother-in-law that could be perpetuating the violence as well. It's also the abuse and the form that it comes in, right? Psychological, economic abuse, sexual abuse. It's quite varied. And I think, the system does its best, but I don't think it's nowhere near where it needs to be in terms of keeping women safe. So here in Victoria, we are seeing women continually die at the hands of male violence. And changing those gender norms is really important. So getting like young people education at a young age is really important. I'm currently sponsoring a petition to mandate sexual violence education in high school students. And that's for
Very good.
boys and girls, to try and
Yes.
change the system, the business as usual, like, oh, yeah, it's a harmless joke. Actually, it's not appropriate.
It's not.
Um, and also the role of the internet in really fueling a lot of this, the manosphere, young men being susceptible to online rabbit holes as well. It can be quite dangerous because they're just like, in these isolated echo chambers where they just, get fed this information. And another thing that's on the rise here in Melbourne is hate crimes against gay men. And it's mostly being perpetrated by young men. So
Right.
these are the ways that we need to intervene early. And our, governments are not really funding the early intervention prevention space as much as they could be.
That's very important what you're saying, because most of the time when it comes to issues of violence, gender-based violence in general, they're treating the consequence, not the cause. This is a universal phenomenon, right? And so this early intervention, I think you're on the absolute right track, because it's the right way to approach this topic. If you think about it, right, Bell Hooks, for example, in feminist theory, Dr. Bell Hooks talks about in one of her books, The Will to Change, how these little boys are the first victims of the patriarchy as such. So because they are the people who are told that, you can't cry, you can't be emotional, you have to be this, you have to be that. So they try to create this little soldier, right, who will then grow up and be the enforcer of patriarchy and oppression. So there are these elements, and these things are connected to how the manosphere works, the attraction of the manosphere to young children, young boys, for example, and then the normalizing of violence that is happening currently. So I think what you're doing is extremely important, and that's the right track, definitely. So on that note, Anasina, I would like to go to another question. Now, our organization is called the Consortium for Intersectional Justice. So intersectionality as in a Black feminist concept, and it has been obviously a very transferable context. We talk about that term in many other parts of the world as well, apart outside the Black feminist context in Turtle Island or in North America. So what we try to do in some of our work is to talk about what it means to advocate for intersectional justice in different contexts, right? In a given political context, like to ask questions about who are the people at the table, who are the people who are not at the table, who are the people who face like systemic discrimination, whose voices are heard and whose voices are not heard, and so on and so forth. So this concept, how has this concept been helpful or not so helpful in your political work?
Oh my gosh, so helpful. Dr. Crenshaw, when she came up with this, just has been so purposeful and also really important in terms of like the experiences of people who are marginalized and oppressed, and the compounding barriers that they face to be able to have, access to leadership roles, access to, good high quality healthcare, education, and so forth. And it's very important to the work that I do because, as I was saying earlier, the portfolios that I cover, they do weave into each other. And it's important for me that when I'm advocating, for example, for a women experiencing violence, it's important for me to understand what the experiences are for different women. It could be a solo mum who has a disability, who also is Black or brown or Indigenous, could be queer as well, and understanding the
Absolutely.
compounding barriers that they face, whether it's discriminatory, sexist, classism, ageism as well, that they face. Like, it's important for me to go into the advocacy with understanding that, their experience is not just, oh, I'm facing this barrier of racism. No, you're also facing a barrier of ableism and also classism, you know? So I think, intersectionality plays a really important role in the work that I do in terms of how I speak on issues in terms of centering those multi-level lived and living experiences
Mhm.
of people in the work that I do. I think it's core.
It's core, absolutely. That's very helpful, to identify you as a woman in political office, how you see this concept. I think that a lot of people watching this and tuning into this would be able to glean some insights from that answer. Anasina, I'm going into quite an interesting and also sometimes challenging territory now. So, building solidarity between Pacifica people and the indigenous people of the territories we know as Australia. And in a place like Narm, for example, I think this is a very important element. And also, I meant to ask what your thoughts are on what we can say about or what we can do about how people from other global majority countries. So now I am Sri Lankan. The Consortium for Intersectional Justice has a strong presence in Sri Lanka. And so your state, the Victoria in Australia, on Narm, is a place that is home to a very substantial Sri Lankan community. So people from global majority countries who also have histories of their land being subjected to violation, their ecosystems being subjected to violation, and in some cases they arrive in places like Australia also because of a colonial capitalist patriarchal pyramid, right? Because we are told in countries like mine that going to a place like Australia is an advancement as such, where you go to this white settler colony, and that it is a way of progressing in your career or whatever. And that is also a trope in a way that extracts human resources from our countries, and that keeps this system sustained. So the least we could do when we arrive in a place like Australia or Aotearoa is to show solidarity to the indigenous people there, right? People who have suffered a great deal, and people from whom we can learn a great deal as well, individually as people, and individually as individuals, as well as communities. So uh, how can we think about better solidarity between people from global majority countries who have made Australia home, and also in the specific case of Pacifica people from other parts of the Pacific who have made Australia home, building relationships and connections of trust between themselves and the Tangata Whenua, as such, the indigenous people of the land. What are your thoughts on those relationships?
Oh, that's such a good question, but also summary of our migration stories. That
Mhm.
there's this assumption that like moving to a country like Australia, there's this advancement, and then that negates the incredible places that we come from, like our places of origin. But I think
Mhm.
it's really important as migrants, whether you have arrived to Nam or Australia because of conflict, not of your choosing, of course, that that word solidarity has to be an active word. It has to be, and when I say active, I mean like you're not just speaking up for First Nations and Indigenous people, either here in Australia or in New Zealand. You're actually sharing power. You're also like stepping to the side and letting them and their voices be uplifted and amplified. Um, it's like Victoria has just entered into treaty era, so we are the first jurisdiction in Australia where the state parliament has signed a treaty with First Nations peoples. And this is so important. However, we are starting to see legislation come through the parliament that deeply disadvantages and is quite harmful for First Nations people. And the government is choosing not to consider First Nations justice, First Nations, impact with regards to some of the legislation that is coming through. And so I guess from a political context, so important to like call the government out. hold them to account. And like, if we're going to walk into this treaty era respecting our First Nations people and mob here in Nam, like we can't have governments just sort of like abdicate their responsibility just because the treaty has been signed. Like justice, there is
100%.
no climate, there is no social justice without First Nations justice. Like that has to be core and center to our work as like, migrants to this country and land, and respecting their enduring connection to waterways and lands, because we ourselves as migrants, as Pacifica, I know what it's like to be connected to oceans. I know what it's like to be
Right.
connected to land. It carries like a very deep-seated place, because that's who we are at our core. And so you bring that when you move here, and respect First Nations people and their knowledge, their wisdom around how to take care of country.
Absolutely, around how to take care of country. And on those few words, how to take care of country, you mentioned the treaty. So, statewide treaty bill of 2025. That is the next thing I wanted to bring up
Oh,
with you. So,
sorry, I may have preempted that.
no, you're all right. That's perfect. So, the statewide treaty bill of 2025. Now, how would you see your role in supporting this process, right? We're especially asking this question because the broader relevance it carries to people from many countries, many contexts, inside and outside Australia. So, I mean, Te Tiritio Waitangi in Aotearoa, the Treaty of Waitangi, has been obviously the center point of the founding of the state of Aotearoa, New Zealand, right? It is the treaty that gives the Tangata Tiriti as such, the treaty people, the people who have the settler people, the authority to establish themselves on the land. So we see in Wellington, New Zealand, how much the current government in New Zealand is trying to dismantle to the best of their possibility, to the best of their capacity, how they're trying to dismantle Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the public opposition it has been receiving. In many other indigenous territories in Turtle Island and elsewhere, indigenous people have been calling for treaties and legislation that really recognizes their sovereignty, a piece of what they have lost for now over a century, or sometimes in a couple of centuries. And it is important so that people can actually look at their history, their languages, their heritage, and find grounded solutions to their problems. So treaties have very strong implications world over. So in terms of your work as a legislator in the Parliament of Victoria, how do you see your role in supporting and engaging with this treaty process?
Oh, great question. And, great examples with New Zealand and the Treaty of Waitangi, with the efforts of the current government to try and undermine it and dismantle it. If anything, that shows us how important it is to protect, the treaty here in Victoria as well. So
Yes.
the Liberal National Coalition Party here in Victoria have actually come out. There's an election coming up in November here in Victoria, so just over 100
Mhm.
days. And they have
Mhm.
pledged that they will rip up treaty in 100 days here in Victoria if they get elected. Like that is a
Right.
huge threat and concern to First Nations justice, because the achievement of treaty last year, that's not just like, that's like decades and decades of hard work of Indigenous people, driving self-determination, driving sovereignty, agency for their people here in Victoria. And the fact that you've got like a major political party like the Liberal and National Coalition pledging to rip that up is a really huge
Mhm.
concern. Now, in terms of like, what I can do and what the Victorian Greens have been doing we've been really pushing hard to connect with communities outside of First Nations people to mobilize support and understand what's at stake here. Because, we are living, working, playing, raising our kids on stolen land. The land was never
Correct.
ceded here in Nam.
Mhm.
And, this treaty potentially is at risk. And can't take this fight lying down. Like, the work is not over, it continues. And we do that out in Parliament, we do that out in community. Anyone that wants to listen, we're out there, like, advocating for protection of treaty here in Victoria,
Mhm.
because it's
Oh,
really
bless.
scary
So
times.
it is indeed. It is indeed. So the Green Party of Victoria has ensured its fullest support to the treaty bill. Yeah.
Yes, and
Oh, very
so
good.
fortunate to vote for treaty last year. Like, I mean, what a huge honor.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
humbled to be able to do that.
Absolutely, 100%. So, Anasina, we are approaching the last sections of our conversation. So, um, let's talk about positionality here. So, you have a broad ranging portfolio, and you also kind of carry the burden of being the first Pacifica woman in elected office in the context of Victoria, right? And could you share some thoughts about the challenges this all comes with? What are your thoughts on expectations, from the Australian establishment on one side, the white settler Australian establishment, because the establishment, in my experience, loves people of color or people from, like in the context of Oceania, people from Pacifica backgrounds, people from, let's say, Tangata Whenua backgrounds in Aotearoa or Tangata Moana backgrounds. They love us until we are useful to the establishment. If we were to say, like, if you were to say tomorrow that you stand for indigenous sovereignty, that flag that is behind your seat on in the cupboard there, and that you advocate for the self-determination, sovereignty, and well-being of the indigenous people of this land, and that you advocate for meaningful reparations, even the most diplomatic statement can be used against you by the media and all the powers that be, because that's how the system tries to protect itself. So there's expectations on the Australian establishment as such. And then there are expectations from your community, because
Mm,
your community also looks up to you as the first woman and as the primary figure. So it's not a responsibility that you get to share with a number of other Pacifica women, but God willing, that time will come. But for now, your community kind of looks up to you, right? It's
yeah.
concentrated around you. So in that sense, also there is a very strong likelihood that it could come with considerable pressure. So does it sometimes feel like, women with specific intersecting identities often put to test when they're given a seat at the table in an excessively demanding way? Because if it's a white man, he wears his suit and comes in, and the system is made for him, the institutions are made for him, and he kind of just flies through it. So, but our experience would be considerably different. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, such a good question. It's interesting, right? Like, very humbled to be the first Pacifica woman in state parliament. Um,
Mhm,
but if anything, this is my opportunity to redefine power.
mhm,
Redefine power in terms of like how I use power, power of the position, power of the privilege, power of the voice, being like an elected representative, sitting in the upper house, which is the House of Review in Parliament here in Victoria,
yes.
really just going hard on issues. It's so important because I think my childhood, me growing up, like, I didn't have the privilege of networks where, like, you see some members of parliaments, their daughters or sons of their parents were MPs as well, members of parliament. And so there's just this expectation, like, of networks when you're in high school, like, yeah, I'll consider being like a politician. But when you're from an upbringing or from a place like in the north where I grew up, of lower socioeconomic class, People judge you before you've even spoken. People think they know what you're about until you show them otherwise. I actually had a member of parliament, I'll never forget this. She said to me, "Oh, your people, they don't speak up. They're good because they never make noise." And,
Oh.
for me, I just thought to myself, wow, okay. So because we don't make noise, we're not afforded those same opportunities of advocacy, fighting for us. And I bring that kind of like, underdog mentality to my work. I just let people
Mhm.
judge me how they want to judge me. And then I just let my work do the talking. That's very much who I am. Like, you know who I am through my actions. You know who I am through the values and how I carry myself. I am a Pacific woman.
Mhm.
I come from a family of very strong Pacific women that are not afraid and unapologetic for standing up for what's right. And while that comes with pressure and responsibility, I'm absolutely ready for it. Like I'm already here. I'm already doing things differently, but I'm doing it with community around me. Because this is how I grew up. So I want to show that your member of parliament is here
Mhm.
for you. Your member of parliament is a public servant. So their job is service and understanding that concept of service. That's really huge in Pacific
Mhm.
culture is service and what that looks like. We have a saying in the Samoan language, like the pathway to leadership is through service. And that's very much how
Mhm.
I've grown up. My parents, giving back to the community, that that hasn't changed for me. Like I'm always paying it forward and want to be accessible and approachable to the community. And I hope they know that
Right.
they can come to me for issues, really just for support and help, guidance, whatever it may be. Um, but there's always
Mhm.
pressure. That pressure's never going to change. I grew up with pressure around me, and I think I can
Mhm.
lean on some of my upbringing and the experiences and challenges that I've been through that carries me through, the hardship, the judgments, the stigma, and microaggressions, and unconscious bias that comes with this job.
And what you said is really, really central to our concept of transformative politics, because you said that you center community in how you work and how you approach these responsibilities. And also, I was thinking of one key word: precedent. The precedent you're setting is very important. If you think 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, 15 years, 20 years down the line, those who will follow your footsteps, they will have someone to look up to, a legacy to look up to. And this also is very important. I mean, it's a critical feminist concept, right? Like in black feminist movements, they say that the fruit of some of the work that we do today, we may not live long enough to see the results of, see that fruit, or to see the results of the work that we today, that we keep working hard and empower the next generation of leaders, and we move on. So you kind of very much embody those principles. And then on that note, Anasina, to a last question for you. If a young Pacifica girl watching this, from Samoa or from Kiribati or wherever, right, or Tonga, watching this episode wants to be sitting in your seat one day, either in the legislature in Victoria or in Canberra or in Wellington, New Zealand, or anywhere else for that matter, what would you like to say to her?
Oh, God, it's making me emotional.
Oh,
Sorry.
you're all right. We can take all the time we need. Oh,
I'm not sure why I'm getting so emotional about that. Um, I think my message would be to her is, you are so loved. You have a community that loves you and wants nothing more but for you to succeed. And if this is something that you care about and you want to go after, absolutely go for it. The world, I mean, they say it all the time, the world is your oyster, and politics is for you. It's not just for white people. It's for Black people, it's for brown people, it's for people with disability, it's for transgender diverse people, it's for anyone that wants to affect social change and change the trajectory of their life and of the communities that they care about. So absolutely go for it. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I got so emotional by that question.
No, you're all right. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. And you're absolutely right that politics is for you. And at the same time, the other way of looking at it is also that that the politics that we do, transformative politics, politics based on service, it's not only legislative, parliamentary assembly kind of politics, right? Because the work is much broader, and there are even more interesting aspects of the politics. Like, for example, when you think of Engage Pacifica that you found during the COVID time, that's very much an epicenter of the work that you do as well, right? So that leads to this, and we have been trained to think that this is some form of colonial conditioning. We are told that the ultimate achievement of politics is political work is to become a member of a legislature or to become a minister. But then, if you think of transformative, critical, decolonial work, political work, it really begins at community level. So the work you do bringing people together, the work you do creating structures such as Engage Pacifica, or the work that my friend and colleague, Professor Chelsea Wattego at the Karumba Institute at Queensland University of Technology, she created a structure called Inala Wangara that brings Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people together. So she was very upset with how the white establishment marginalizes her people. So she created her own structure. So that is also very much central to the politics that we do, right? So that is where we find joy. And that is what gives us the strength to address the challenges of navigating the legislature the way you are doing, because the legislature was not made for you, but you come with the power, like you said, the power of your ancestors to stand your ground in the legislature. Am I right?
Absolutely. Beautiful, beautiful summing up. That was wonderful.
Oh, bless. Anasina, this brings us to the end of our conversation today. And you shared some really, really useful, helpful thoughts. And I'm sure in the near future or in further down the line in a few years from now, anyone watching this, especially young women watching this from the Oceania region or from any other part of the world, would find this conversation to be very useful in terms of what it means to be a woman engaged in transformative politics, the kind of approach that you pursue when it comes to policy and when it comes to your positionality and the legacy that you leave ahead for the next generation. So it has been a tremendous pleasure to host you, and more power to you, and may you keep thriving in your political journey. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Such an honor.